After being endlessly passed over by Gedo during his first 7 years in New Japan, Zack Sabre Jr. has had an amazing 5 months. He became the second foreign wrestler to win the G1 Climax, the first wrestler to successfully cash in that IWGP World Heavyweight title shot before the Tokyo Dome, the second foreigner to win the Tokyo Sports MVP Award, the first foreigner to successfully defend the heavyweight title at Wrestle Kingdom, and the first wrestler to successfully defend the heavyweight title in back-to-back nights at the Tokyo Dome. Finally headlining the Tokyo Dome, much less doing it back-to-back nights, put Zack Sabre Jr. at the top of arguably the grandest stage in pro wrestling. Unfortunately, neither match turned out to be one Sabre should be remembered for. The Shota Umino debacle was one of the worst examples of how Gedo's unnecessarily unending matches remove options and undermine the potential for the performers to be entertaining by putting them in a defensive energy conservation mode. The Ricochet match succeeded at being enjoyable by being kept to a reasonable length, but it was just an exhibition for Ricochet's athleticism, with the AEW star avoiding anything that could be described as matwork like the plague. The memorable match from the Tokyo Dome double shot was Kenny Omega versus Gabe Kidd, because Omega got to do what Sabre didn't, deliver one of his own signature matches. Despite the world stage that Sabre has been on, the matches he should be most remembered for during his recent run are his less publicized encounters with Mexico's grappling wizard Hechicero. As memorable as their August 24th, 2024 RevPro match that not only blew away everything AEW did the following day for All in London at the enormous Wembley Stadium, but was also one of the handful of best matches of the year, their fourth encounter at New Japan Battle in the Valley 2025 on January 11th, 2025 in San Jose Civic is their masterpiece. The way pro wrestling works today, a non-title semifinal on a show that only drew 1,800 fans isn't supposed to exceed the big main event title matches, but perhaps it was because this setting allowed them to deliver the technical wrestling masterclass they're capable of, in its purest form, that it was so magnificent. One could argue that this should have been the main event, rather than Desperado's junior heavyweight title defense against Taiji Ishimori, that was the rematch of their very good Super Junior final from June 9th, 2024. Perhaps by not having to meet a certain level of expectations for New Japan, rather than something tailored to the actual strength of the individuals involved, Sabre and Hechicero didn't fall prey to the cookie-cutter approach that leads to the typical forms, tropes, and match length of the promotion, and instead delivered the match only they were capable of. Every match between Zack Sabre Jr. and Hechicero has been better than the last one, which is an incredibly impressive feat given these guys aren't youngsters who are just improving with experience, and they've now had recommendable matches in 4 different leagues across 3 countries. They seem much more confident in themselves here, but more importantly, their familiarity has allowed them to push things that much farther with one another. This was pretty much a submission jam session. To some extent, their first couple of matches were like 2 great jazz musicians who hadn't played together before. Now they've really gelled together, understanding how to set each other up and coexist in a manner that not only brings out the best in both, but takes each other to a higher level. This was by far the best they've worked together, and it felt like they fully trusted their style and their capabilities. Hechicero really stepped up his game here. He finally felt like something of an equal. That was crucial for the higher level of difficulty style they were now able to work, where every motion solicited a counter motion. They were countering back and forth to negate the pressure of the opponent and apply some of their own, rather than just taking turns doing their holds. This was constant motion grappling at its finest, at least outside of what Johnny Saint was doing in World of Sport, or Volkan was doing in rings back in the day. They never really stayed in the same position, always trying to move and adjust to shift the leverage and pressure into their favor. Nothing really worked for either, but I mean that in the most complimentary way, because both knew what they were doing in every situation, and just naturally had an answer. This was the first of their 4 matches where it felt like they truly did what they wanted to do, which was daring because the crowd didn't have a wrestler to obviously root for this time, and the style was that much further from what they normally see. Their 2024 matches were out of the ordinary overall, but much less so for the crowds they worked for, given they did more of a lucha submission style in CMLL on June 22nd, where the crowd rooted for Mexican Hechicero, and more of a World of Sport technical style on August 24th in RevPro, where the crowd rooted for British Zack Sabre Jr. The crowd predictably wasn't nearly into this as their previous 2 matches, because there wasn't a wrestler from their country to root for, but they got more and more earned applause as the bout progressed. This was more an elaborate, flowing match style than we'd previously seen from them, where the fans were won over by the quality, and given what they'd see in virtually any other modern match, the originality. The mat work was a fluid, flowing, shifting counter sequence until someone escaped. The match never slowed up or let down when they were locked up. They had resets when someone escaped, but both guys were playing offense and defense the entire time they were in range of one another, and this gave it the air of a serious submission grappling fight, even though there could have been more resistance shown. It's so rare to see a 23-minute match in this day and age that is never remotely stagnant. They were always moving and adjusting, twisting and turning, shifting and contorting. It was never predictable, as it wasn't about any one move, it was about the quest to find the one that the other somehow didn't have the answer for. To an extent, they were just showing us every position they could think of, but that worked because the story of the match was that both always had the solution, and they were able to pull it off so it didn't have that usual pro wrestling feel of one guy just waiting around for the other to do his thing. They worked in some moves here and there, but it didn't feel like they were forcing them just to check off the boxes. This match has a ton of style and finesse. I love Zack's matches against Will Ospreay, but they obviously were never going to be Zack's matches the entire time. That isn't a knock on them, or on Ospreay. Even though Will's British wrestling training seemed to focus on lucha libre and the more modern hodgepodge of international gymnastics-oriented wrestling, he understands Zack's style well enough to make those portions work, and his flying certainly adds to those matches because Zack understands how to incorporate it usefully. It's great to see a match that doesn't have to become something else because the opponent has stuff to do though. Sabre and Hechicero were able to move away from submissions at times in the second half without it feeling jarring. One can argue the merits of total discipline versus variety, but regardless, it definitely never felt like they were suddenly doing a different match. Hechicero's agility for his size and his charisma work better here as minor factors to liven things up for the fans who aren't used to real graps, while not distracting from the match they were doing by feeling too out of place. It's fantastic that Zack got to headline 2 Tokyo Dome shows, and even got to win there, but Zack has to be portrayed as a unique talent. He's not someone that's going to awe you by looking at him, or by theoretically doing a better version of the same thing everyone else does. You have to see him work his magic. A ridiculously overlong match that both workers have no choice but to slow down considerably for, and an opponent who avoided the ground entirely, obviously wasn't going to be conducive to satisfying Zack's existing fans, or more importantly, creating new ones. This Hechicero match was a real Zack Sabre match for sure though. In comparison to their previous matches, this was much more intricate and less cooperative and posed. They just went hold for 23 minutes 43 seconds in a very artistic manner. They were moving well thinking, working hard to outsmart each other with a creative submission or an unforeseen pinfall. The selling didn't make the match too unrealistic because they either did it while continuing to wrestle or saved it for the resets. There were minor diversions here and there, but the match was so refreshing because it wasn't trope-laden and overdone. There was no flipping and flopping, writhing and contorting. They didn't look like they were auditioning for the 3rd grade drama club. They kept it to a reasonable length where they were able to go hard the whole time. All in all, this match was remarkably refreshing, both for New Japan as a promotion, and for these wrestlers who couldn't rely on the newness of the matchup now that we've seen them wrestle 3 times in 7 months. The flash pin that Zack loves so much to keep these programs against the few techers alive may have been a bit anticlimactic. From start to finish, these guys were separated by almost nothing, and the quest to outmaneuver the opponent was the story of the entire match. Even though a submission was obviously the ideal finish for the match itself, Zack seemed to challenge Hechicero to a match for his own title, even though he was the one who won, so the fully decisive finish would have worked against our chance to get what will most likely be the true highlight of Zack's title reign. The flash pin was at least a much better finish than what we get in most pro wrestling theme matches, where they focus on an appendage, only to win with some kind of random big blow or bomb that has nothing to do with anything else they did. What we got may not have been ideal, but it was certainly much better than if Zack randomly won with his Zack driver. This is probably the purest grappling match they'll ever have. It felt uncompromised, and like the reason they became pro wrestlers in the first place, even though pro wrestling has shifted very far away from their style of wrestling long before they got involved. 2 weeks into 2025, it sounds like hyperbole, but it doesn't feel like any other match you're likely to see from a mainstream wrestling promotion in 2025 will provide better technical grappling, barring a rematch or Bryan Danielson coming back to face one of these guys. While Bryan Danielson's February 11th, 2024 match against Zack was better overall, this Zack vs. Hechicero match was actually a lot more smooth and flowing than what Danielson would do with either, should he make his triumphant return. There are a lot of styles of pro wrestling, but in 2025, they all boil down to being the wrestler's choice of high spots and the dead time in between that preferred brand of spectacle. Too many wrestlers are just trying to be someone greater who came before them, doing matches that are someone else's outdated notion of what a wrestling match should be, usually ignoring the most basic things we've learned from real wrestling or fighting, such as takedowns are the way a match goes from standing to the ground. What made this match great is that it ignored the stop and start style that makes everything disjointed and lacking in cohesion, believability, and momentum, and instead gave us a genuine continuum. They just kept working consistently until they found a logical point to momentarily break the chain and restart it. And that's the way a fight goes. You defend yourself until once in a while a position changes and you maybe get a second or two to think about your next entry or method of attack. We need more matches like this that are less simplistic and constrained, boxed in and stretched out. I like what Zack had to say about his outlook on pro wrestling in a recent PWI interview. I think the most important thing about pro wrestling is that it can be whatever you want it to be, or whatever it can be. So the restriction is only what the wrestler puts on themselves, or whether it's another form of art, or sport or entertainment, or whatever it is. The key is just being sincere in this context. The rest that you want to be, I think people can connect with that if the sincerity is there. Zack is one of the few who clearly has that sincerity. He's great because he's genuine, and genuinely great. I give this match 4.5 stars out of 5.